from the past. Okay, so we are going to make a little change. So everybody rise, call to order, and I'm going to ask Regent Tillis. I know, you are. We're going to ask Regent, why, it's a long one?
I would ask that, say amen, and then sit, and then I can give you your...
Okay, we're not going to do amen, but we're going to ask everybody
Harry
to...
Phillips would have
Okay,
preferred that.
okay, so we're going to ask everybody to sit, and we'll do a moment of reflection while we sit.
Please.
Okay. I saw that, Regent.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've been doing a lot of thinking about some of the things that are going on now. One, I met with 6 or 7 superintendents from varying school districts last week, and each one of them reported a recent incidence of swastikas in their schools, and anti-black Klan kinds of things going on. And these are not school districts that you would imagine would have fostered a lot of this problem. At the same time, I had a meeting with some people from we have a World War II museum on Long Island. And along with people from the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Congress, there is a feeling that a lot of the people who do swastikas had no idea what the Holocaust was, no idea what World War II was all about.
Yeah.
And I met with the head of the State Social Studies Teachers Association, and we put together a little bit of a task force, including somebody from the emeritus from the History Channel, from these other groups, to see if we can develop a curriculum, a better curriculum. Right now, it's required to have these things, but I've been told that as little as 90 minutes might be spent on the Holocaust, and that's really insufficient. And in conjunction with World War II, and the ramifications of that, it seems to be really necessary. And if you look at what happened, this is from Gary Ackerman, who's my friend, and I'm trying to get it right now. I think it's very important that we put it in the context of how that relates to not just everyday life on Long Island or around the state or around the country, but I'm going to edit this a little bit, but this is his thrust. I've seen a long list of Democrats who vigorously denounced this hate and anti-Semitism from a few in our party, and who did so instantly. I'm looking for others who might criticize other hate speech, such as on white supremacy, who's David Duke, the fact that some Nazis are decent, or these are quotes from governmental people. You Jews in this room know better than anyone else how to influence people with your money. I don't want your money, said one presidential candidate last time. Yeah, the Democrats have our wackos, and we denounce and speak out against them. We don't idolize them, and we view them with adoration, and we don't idolize them and view them with adoration and pretend they didn't say revolting and disgusting things. And we don't falsely condemn the other party of racism as Trump did ours, because we know that's not true. The problem is that we are not doing our job in the schools, because this whole series, it might be fomented because there's a lack of civility perhaps going on at the top, but because our kids don't seem to have any knowledge of the past, I think we are somewhat failing in our responsibilities to make kids understand the need of understanding what happened in the past could easily happen in the future. And I would hope that we would move towards a better understanding in our schools in any way we can, because right now I think it's come to the fore, and that's my opening call.
Thank you, Regent Tillis. At this time, I'd like to recognize the recent action by the Assembly and the Senate to re-elect our 4 incumbent members whose term has expired, and of course they will be effective April 1st. Regent Sia, Regent Norwood, Regent Cantrell, and Regent Finn. And I'd like, on behalf of the board, and I'm sure the board has already done so, to congratulate all 4 of them, not only for their amazing work, and but also for their commitment and to continue to do this work with an amazing salary that comes with. Not only an amazing salary, but I'm going to quote one of my colleagues who talks about the lack of resources attached to that amazing salary. Even some of the most simple things that most people would require and need. So on behalf of the entire board and on behalf of the community, that your own personal judicial district that I know appreciates your advocacy and all the time that you give to invest in hearing the voices of your community and representing them. Thank you so much for your great work.
And I want to speak as the commissioner and also as SED and the support that that the 4 of you and the entire team of regents have given to us as we really address some difficult issues in New York and challenge ourselves to be thinking how we can do things better. So thank you all, really the 4, but all. We appreciate it.
I just respond on behalf of the Committee of the Professions. Phew, it would have been wiped out. All 4 of us serve on the committee.
That's right.
Oh, wow.
The profession, the committee that was. Okay. Now, in addition to that, also, we have I have to say that I know Regent Reyes was there yesterday as well. Many of you hear me every year talk about the mock assembly and that the amazing, as Commissioner knows, the amazing work that these young, talented future leaders put together during under the leadership of the superintendent Gladys Cruz, who we are so proud, not only because of her commitment but her work beyond her regular work, to ensure that these young, talented individuals have an opportunity not only to interface and interact with each other in terms of students throughout the state, but also to demonstrate. It is absolutely a combination of doing the research, coming together, articulating, demonstrating the power of arguing a point, but doing it with such grace and focus. And it's just an amazing experience. Each year I look forward to it, regardless of how crazy our schedules are. And I walk out energized and always with a sense of hope that our youth and our young people are doing this kind of work. So I'd like to, at this time, recognize 3 students that are representing their colleagues, their fellow students, Irlanda Hernandez, Ana Perez, and Leslie Gomez. Please stand. And since many of you were not there yesterday, I will tell you, it was the speaker was an amazing young woman who's been, I think for 3 years, she's been part of the program. And Gladys, please correct me, I think her mom is Puerto Rican and her father is from Iran. And the entire, I will tell you, the leadership yesterday really made a statement about the power of women. And even as we advance many of these issues, the young women were so great. I mean, I was so grateful for the fact that they were so gracious in the way that they executed their performance and their work during this this particular mock assembly. So,
And the governor, too.
oh, the governor, my God, she was. I would tell you, I would say, Cuomo, look out.
Very articulate.
Very,
Right, all of them were. It was wonderful.
and gracious, and an amazing governor, to say the least. Okay, so thank you again, and keep up that amazing work. And remember that we talked about one of the things that we're making them equity warriors. So they're going to be wearing a pin. And all of them are going out there as equity warriors. And I know, Judith Johnson, you will be extremely proud of that. The other thing is that we talked about the issue of they're going to be butterflies because they understand the issue of having a right wing and a left wing, but that they need both to fly.
Amen.
So,
Chancellor,
yes.
if I might just
Sure.
add briefly that the students discussed legislation, the pros and cons, presenting evidence, citing research, but one of the issues which rings true to the reflection of Regent Tillis is that it's not just swastikas, it's not just clans, it's cages and children in cages and go back to where you belong. And so when people don't know that a Puerto Rican child is a child of the United States already, even if a territory and not a state, there's a lack of history and a lack of knowledge. And the students were discussing and agreeing to legislation, including the DREAM Act and other acts that would protect the rights of immigrants.
Thank you, Regent Reyes. Okay, now for our focus of our work video, which we usually have every month. We have the South Bronx Charter School for International Cultures and the Arts. And representing the school here, we have Evelyn Hay, the principal. We have Deborah Villa Tricomi, and we have Johanna Alfonso and Richard Izquierdo Arroyo. They're here representing a charter school that I will tell you I visited, and you talk about educating the whole child and looking at the arts, looking at culture, language, focused on a school that's really focused on giving students everything from dancing, music, and a strong, I walked into a science class, a very strong focus on young women really becoming extremely knowledgeable about science, and a commitment to not only the issue of the whole child, but a commitment to social, emotional, and also the idea that the children are very much valued in that community, in that school. It's an amazing place. It's worth a visit for those of you that want to see a place that education is at the core, and family and the school sense of making it a very welcoming place is present. So without further ado, I think we're going to look at, actually, you know what, before we go on to the Vice Chancellor, we're going to look at the video, and then Vice Chancellor, after the video, we will turn to you. Okay.
Welcome to the South Bronx Charter School for International Cultures in the Arts.
Our school is a dual language school, so every grade, starting from kindergarten, has 2 teachers. My homeroom students are with me for 1 whole week, and then my partner, my English partner, gets my homeroom the following week. So it's a 50-50 model for our school.
What are we observing?
About half of them speak only Spanish, the Spanish speakers, and I have English language learners, learning English and Spanish at the same time.
5 más 6 es igual a blanco moneda.
With a student population that's 91% at poverty and 40% English language learners, students at South Bronx Charter School ICA are thriving as they embrace thinking-based learning, dual language learning, and collaboration.
We build this language learning through songs, acting out stories, lots of visuals, lots of movement.
Through dual language learning, students develop greater cognitive flexibility, increased attention and memory, and superior problem-solving skills. They show more positive attitudes and appreciation towards other cultures, and are better prepared for the global community and job markets in the 21st century.
The students have been learning about the Iroquois Indian.
Y se van a pensar en esa pregunta. ¿Quién fue más importante? ¿La mujer o el hombre?
La mujer fue la más importante
Explica por qué.
porque ellas hicieron más cosas que los hombres
Hacer más cosas. Agregar eso.
y también fueron la más importante de la familia del Iroquois. Yo quiero agregar porque también ellos, las mujeres eran las que cuidaban la familia bastante. Porque los hombres fueron los que cogieron la comida para las mujeres cocinarla y también fueron los que hicieron la casa y también fueron los que cogieron los animales para comerlo. Entonces las mujeres ellos cogían lo que los hombres entendían, lo que los hombres hicieron y después ellos hicieron la comida. So yo creo que los hombres son lo más importante.
It's pretty interesting to see how they evolved throughout the years.
I think it's a really good opportunity to start speaking Spanish and English at a younger age so you can know more about other people's beliefs and their past.
40% of the student population at South Bronx Charter School ICA are English language learners, one of the highest for charter schools in New York City. L's scoring levels 3 and 4 from 2017 compared to 2018 increased by 20% in ELA, increased by 50% in math. L students scoring level 1 were eliminated for ELA and decreased by 20% in math.
So now in your tables, you're gonna either consider removing the tower, suspender cables, a deck, the caissons, or the anchor.
What I like about the thinking-based learning, that it can apply throughout your whole curriculum, not just in one subject, but throughout all subjects.
Thinking-based learning develops critical thinking and problem-solving skills, fosters deep and thoughtful discussion, expands individual perspective, while providing equity for all participants.
Topics aren't really just these small, narrow things that kids just focus on for 30 minutes of the day and then move forward to the next thing, right? Because in real life, things grow and they connect and they interconnect all the time.
Now, we take off the deck. What two things would happen?
The deck wouldn't hold the cards.
A lot of times you have one student taking over or you have students disengaged. But where you're thinking-based learning, you see that if you have a group of four, all four are working together to figure out how can we complete this template.
Collaboration has real-world applications. It moves students away from working independently on a task. As a team, they're obliged to consider and respect each other's opinions, while at the same time, problem solving.
It's helpful. You all work together would help you create more ideas in your work.
We become more the facilitators, and so it becomes more student-led.
And she probably felt annoyed when Curtis told her that it was her sweater and it wasn't Rachel's. This proves how she thinks that she could compare this to the nesting dolls, because she thinks that if you're 11, you could go back to your old age and you could feel the same way.
We're teaching these children how to work in groups, how to socialize and kind of figure out the way people interact with each other in a more professional system.
Like usually a Socratic seminar, I really have to think hard and accept their thoughts sometimes.
You have an opinion, and then if somebody else has a different opinion, you can talk about it, and you can have an agreement on something. You can communicate, and people can help you with what you're doing.
I want them to be passionate about their education, making them care. That keeps them engaged at all times, keeps them constantly aware.
The idea of having students always wanting to learn and happy to come here and providing a safe environment from everything that's going on outside, I feel like that's what makes me want to teach.
We're like a big, huge family in one huge building, and it's awesome.
Thank you for sharing your journey and your amazing place. I also want to point out that it is in one of the poorest areas of the South Bronx. The other person I want to recognize is Carmen Perez Hogan. Thank you so much for being here, and you're always here, and you're always in many of the conversations around the issue of the L's, because that was your passion, and it continues to be your passion. And thank you for also some of the work that you're doing in Puerto Rico. So, yeah. Thanks. Okay. As we move forward, at this time, I'd like, Vice Chancellor has an executive session motion.
Madam Chancellor, colleagues, I move at this time that the Board of Regents convene an executive session Monday, March 11th, today, at 3:15 to discuss litigation matters.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Thank you. Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so now we get to Regent Tillis.
You can get up for this one.
I don't think so, but.
I sent to you earlier this week or last week a copy of the Regent's procedures for the election of officers, which we will now commence. The Chancellor has asked that I act as presider of this election. As we move through the process, I'll explain each step along the way, but I want to highlight several housekeeping matters before we begin. As provided in the Regent's procedures, the affirmative vote of a majority of those present for a given candidate is required. And we have how many present? 16?
16.
Okay.
No, 15. 15.
Okay. Provided that no candidate shall be elected without the vote of the majority of the entire membership of the board, which is 9 votes. B, voting will be conducted by voice vote, and the State Department We'll maintain a record of the final vote of each regent present in accordance with the Public Officers Law. It's very important to actually have a written determination of your votes. During the process, there'll be opportunities for nominees to engage in a question, comment session with their colleagues. We'll entertain as many questions and comments as you have. I will allot approximately 5 minutes for each such session, and my very, very trusty clock keeper, Beth Berlin, will be watching the clock and will signal if the question session goes more than 5 minutes, at which point you will be cut off. The music will start. The music will start playing. So, with that, I call for the nomination for the office of Chancellor of the Board of Regents for the period of April 1, 2019 through March 31, 2022. Each nomination has to be seconded by another regent, and each nominator will be allotted 2 minutes to speak. Each seconder will be allotted 1 minute to speak, and each nominee will then be given up to 3 minutes to speak. Beth Berlin will be watching the clock. The music will come on, and will signal when the allotted time has expired. So I call for the nomination for the office of Chancellor. Beverly Overford.
I've been reflecting on this time a few years ago. It's on. That better?
Yes.
It was an interesting point in time. Seems like we were in turmoil, would be a fair word, as a Board of Regents and as a state education department. But then again, we've been in a lot of turmoil since. And we were looking for someone special to take over at that point in time. I myself was a fairly new regent and didn't feel I knew the candidates. But somehow I formed a friendship with the person who's now our chancellor. And we decided that we were born in different countries to different parents, but we're sisters of sorts. And we were the Bobbsey twins this weekend because neither of us set our clock in shape, and we were both speeding to Albany knowing that we were going to be late. I remember Betty announcing to me that she was going to throw her name in the ring. And I said, really? She said, yes. I have to tell you, as I know people better at this table, I don't know of anyone who could have taken on the responsibilities that we faced at that point in time and still and done the kind of job that Betty Rosa has done. She's not only knowledgeable. I've worked with a lot of leaders over my nearly 60 years in education, but she has a personality that kind of sucks you in to at least listen to her. You might want to resist for a minute or two. She even had that experience as she called each member of the board to get a reaction. She called me one day and she said, I'm getting some strange reactions. I didn't have the heart to say I expected that because she's brave. She's courageous. And you can't sit here right now and not be brave and courageous. There's too much lacking for our kids. And I went through a couple of tough times at the beginning of my tenure on the board with the previous chancellor. And I went home and shared something with my oldest son, and he let me have it right between the eyes. And I wouldn't let him see me crying, but I went home and cried for a while to cleanse all of the thoughts that were going through my mind, because right at the beginning, I knew I couldn't sit here and do the work that needed to be done without doing what I feel is right for kids. And I'm kind of glad he hit me side the head at that early stage, because I thought I was ready for all the responsibilities. But it took him, his comments, to bring me full circle. I still have those times when I want to burst into tears because we can't do enough fast enough. And I've looked carefully around this table in the meantime as we've faced so many challenges. And I, with a very, very confident heart, feel the best choice is to continue with our current chancellor, so I nominate her for this position. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Yeah? You get a minute if you want.
Oh, I even get to talk. Yeah. I'm planning on that. I just figured I'd wave my hand. Bev, I don't even know what to say on the heels of that. I got a little choked up. You know, and I was new to the board when we had our last election, and without knowing Chancellor at all, or that she was even planning to run, she called me and introduced herself, and we had a lovely chat, and she had a plan. And she, you know, said, I want to do this, and I'm asking for your vote. And I respect that because, and I didn't even understand at the time that I joined this board what I was really in for, right?
None of us did.
Forget about the chancellor not knowing what she was in for, but just to serve on this board is such a massive responsibility, and it has taken really I've been on the board 3 years now. It has taken all this time for me to really come to understand the depth and, you know, gravity of the responsibility that we have. And we need a leader who is willing to take that on and shepherd us through. And there are things that we need to do. You've gotten us this far, and I look forward, hopefully, to seeing you take us through to the next phase of the work that we need to do.
Right.
Thank you.
Regent Collins.
I met our current chancellor about 15 years ago during a workshop that I was conducting on stress. And I think I can take some credit for it because she has managed stress very well with this Regents. And I can only just say that we have someone who listens, who takes our messages, who understands the plight of our children in New York State, and she negotiates with all of us. She listens to us, especially to me, because I bother her a lot. I take my hat off to you, and I want to say that there's no way that we could go beyond you. We have to re-elect you as our chancellor because you've done a magnificent job.
Any other?
I just want to thank you, Betty, for all of the work you've done on behalf of New York State, and also for the respect that you give each and every member of the board. Thank you.
Yes, I'm also allowed to make a secondary comment, and I would reiterate really what you three have said. I can only tell you that the board now is such a different board than when I started 14 years ago. It's so different than it was 4 years ago or 3 years ago. We have a group of people that are knowledgeable in education. I don't agree all the time with everybody, but people are really knowledgeable in education. And we have a chancellor that lets everybody have their say, and a commissioner that respects what this board does also. And I think it's a great combination and would like to see it continue. That's my impartial. Okay. Yes, Judith.
I couldn't let it go without saying something. So I've known Betty for a very long time, way back when she was the superintendent, and of course till now, that I've known her really more deeply and more closely the last few years. But it's really about the consistency of her message and where her heart is, and it's always about kids. So whatever decision she makes, it's always about what's best for kids. And I think that's so important for those of us sitting on the board, that that is always her agenda.
I've been on the board for 8 years now, and what I like about Betty is her intelligence and her sense of humor. She's never lost that sense of humor in the most difficult of times. So thank you, Betty.
Roger.
Yes, Judy?
These are turbulent times in our country and for our children. And I use a term often that I think reflects all of us sitting around this table, and Betty leads us in this. She is our peacetime warrior for equity for children. And we absolutely really respect and thank you for the efforts you've put in place, for the courage that you have to take the phone calls that must come from all of us. And the debates that you have to endure in order to get us to a point. And guess what? We mostly end up agreeing with her, even though we start off deciding that we're going to challenge something that's on the agenda. But I want to end by saying we need peacetime warriors, and she's a general that's leading us at this point. So thank you very much for what you've done thus far, and we look forward to working with you as our leader.
Thank you. Thank you.
Not everybody has to make the second. Do we have any other nominations? Anybody move to close the nominations?
Move to close.
Regent
So moved.
Chen and Regent Reyes? Second?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All in favor of closing the nominations?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, now we will have a voice vote, and then by individual regents need to express your views so that we can take them down and for the record. And somebody from, Allison, you going to read the list?
Sure. Sure, we'll just go down the roll and call for a yay or a nay or an abstain. Vice Chancellor Brown,
Yay.
Regent Tillis,
Yay.
Regent Sia,
Yay.
Regent Norwood,
Aye.
Regent Cashin,
Yay.
Regent Cottrell,
Yay.
Regent Chin,
Yay.
Regent Odekirk,
Yay.
Regent Collins,
Yay.
Regent Johnson,
Yay.
Regent Meade,
Yay.
Regent Hankinson,
Yay.
Regent Reyes,
See. Yay.
Regent Mittler,
Yay.
Chancellor Rosa.
Yay.
Thank you.
The nominee, and now the elected, well, we have to announce the election returns. This is a vote, Allison,
By unanimous vote. Chancellor Rosa.
Thank you.
You can have 3 minutes if you want.
No, I'm going to take one. Because I think we're running behind schedule. So, first of all, thank you. And I did get some yay from some of the public people through my iPad, so I thank them as well. First and foremost, I do want to say that, a lot of times we ask, and I thank the board for the vote of confidence, and we ask, why do we do this work? And I'm honored, and I feel very privileged to continue to do this work because we know this is very difficult, very challenging. And a lot of times, as I stated, we ask, why do we serve on this board? We do it with elegance. We do it with, as I stated earlier, no salaries. I know I'm looking at Regent Collins. And we do it with a certain amount of commitment to not only just our judicial districts, but the children of the state and the communities that we serve. Many times we face many challenges as those before us have faced, and we try to, in many ways, always do what is right, and that can be in itself very difficult. Ours is a noble pursuit of excellence in America's ongoing experiment in democracy, and we rightfully have added a sense of inclusiveness and a sense of equity into the mix of how we do this work. So we know that our policies, our direction, our leadership must evolve and must continue to reflect that of those that are marginalized in many communities. So as we continue this work, I would submit that we have to do it in a way that allows us to really give voice to those that many times are not only not sitting at the table, but are voiceless. And we will have to remember that as we continue this work, that we are focused on doing the work, but being transparent, being available, being forthright, and being the kind of leaders collectively that look at how our work impacts on the practice and that the people that we touch every single day. And as all of you who know me, it's always the question, what does this have to do with children? We will always keep that as our core mission. And it's important to make sure that when we're in the public arena, that our narrative reflects what does this have to do with children. So thank you for the continued commitment. Thank you for the friendship. Thank you for those moments that we laughed together. And thank you to the community who sits here every single month and supports our work, our stakeholders, and most importantly, all of our legislators and those children that need us every single day. And thank you, Commissioner, for everything that you do to make sure that collectively as a body that we advance our public agenda. And your staff, of course. Thank you.
I just want to affirm the votes that you had. This was a very smart decision.
And I'd also want to thank the people in this room of the media. It's not often that a governmental body can commend the media for reporting news that is factual, but I think we can, in this board, give thanks to the media for doing so. And I haven't seen a whole lot of fake news coming out of our board meetings. I also want to thank us for being the true advocate for children in Albany. I won't go further. Now we go to the election of the nominations for the Vice Chancellor, and I call for such nominations, the same process as we had the first time. Yes.
I would recommend Vice Chancellor Brown from Rochester.
Okay.
Oh, and then I have time. Well, oops.
Yes, you do.
Yes, I do. He has, at this end of the table, I like the arrangement for the setup. He has guided us gently and to the point, and because of that, I would like to put his name in nomination.
Okay. Is there a second?
I will second.
Second.
5 people want a second. Does anybody want a second with a comment?
I certainly will do that. I think it's important that we have a team that works and that we keep that team in place. I think that our colleague supports the work of our chancellor, and they are making the right decisions on behalf of our children. I think he listens very carefully to us, and it would be a disaster if we suddenly saw a new team leading an effort that needs to continue. So with that, I would like to offer my second for Vice Chancellor Brown.
Anybody else? Another second. Yes, Christine.
Briefly, you are the voice of reason sometimes when things get hot and heavy, so thank you so much for that.
There were others? Catherine?
I think he is solid as a rock. You can count on him. And I appreciate your support publicly and privately. So thank you for all you do.
Any other seconds? I'll add one because it's nice to have that voice of reason on the regents. We used to have over a period of time. We've had Jim Talon. We've had other regents that really provided that solidity behind what we do and to keep us from killing each other. And I really appreciate, because I know how much work Andrew has to do beyond the regents, and the fact that he's willing to give up as much time and energy at the same time as running a big operation and being a lawyer, which is really, really hard thing to do. We appreciate it, so I would also offer him a second. If no other seconds, then I will call for the voice vote.
Wait, motion to close?
Oh, yeah, that's what I said. Motion to close.
A second.
Yes, okay. We have
Regent Mittler.
both? Yeah, Mittler and Seal. Betty. Okay. All in favor of the motion to close? All opposed? Okay. Allison, you want to call the roll?
Absolutely. Vice Chancellor Brown?
Yay.
Regent Tillis?
Yay.
Regent Sia?
Yay.
Regent Norwood?
Aye.
Regent Cashin?
Yay.
Regent Cottrell?
Yay.
Regent Chin?
Yay.
Regent Odekirk?
Yay.
Regent Collins? Regent Johnson?
Yay.
Regent Meade?
Yay.
Regent Hackinson?
Yay.
Regent Reyes?
Yes.
Regent Mittler?
Yay.
And Chancellor Rosa?
Yay.
Thank you.
And
Unanimous.
roll the announcement of the...
We have 15 votes unanimous in favor of the election of Vice Chancellor Brown.
My job is done.
Thank you all. I will be brief, truly brief. I thank you all for your support. I join Regent Meade in her comments that we take on a very important role and huge responsibility in the state of New York. I've enjoyed my past term as Vice Chancellor, working with the Chancellor and the Commissioner, senior SED staff, and all of you around this table as we pursue the work that is so important to our common mission. And after comments today by Regent Sia and Regent Tillis, I know that my newly defined role is to always be the voice of reason and to stop the killing. So I thank you for those additional points to the definition of the role of Vice Chancellor. I look forward to continuing to work with all of you and serving the State Education Department as well as the citizens of this state. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. I think that we have a winning team in the two of you as leaders, and we really, as State Ed, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And Vice Chancellor, thank you for we have a yin and a yang. And thank you for obviously many times giving the perspective of reminding us that there is a legal focus on many of the issues that we do. And balancing many times the issue of the social, emotional sense of doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you.
now we turn to the next. We are going to have the commissioner provide us with a presentation on special education.
Thank you, Chancellor. So we have a bit of a move of seats. So staff that's moving up there, Angelica, Chris, Kevin, Lizette.
Well, something about the top, yeah.
What's that? Oh, that's not mine. I haven't had any order. You can do that.
One? Did you end up with two of
That
those?
came through fast.
Of the
Which?
It's already on. Oh, that's hilarious.
You need a copy, it's going, yeah. Tony. Region Company.
She didn't get a copy.
Came through
Right.
immediately. What time is this?
All right. So, board members, this is an overview today of where New York State stands in meeting the requirements of IDEA, and specifically our outcomes regarding compliance and performance, ultimately to bring success to New York students. This is an introduction. Part 2 will be presented in the coming months. And this goes through a number of documents that you've seen at various points, and we've updated those to make sure that you have the most current data. So I think we're set to begin. Angelica?
Okay, I don't want to sit in front of the slide presentation. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you, give you kind of an overview of the purpose of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the IDEA. And I think we more or less know on the board what it represents, right? But at the end of the day, it's about a free and appropriate education for our students that are differently abled. And it is our responsibility at State Ed to make sure that that takes place at the district level and at the school level. So students, that they receive their special education and related services, and sometimes they're one and the same. And these services are supposed to be referred to or applied based on the student's need in order for that student to succeed. For example, I'll give you a quick example because I love to talk about my son. So my son is not only just in an inclusion class, but he also receives speech, OT, and PT, right? And the goal is for that to happen within the classroom. So those are the related services as well as the special education services that he needs. And obviously, it would be tailored to his individual needs. Then if you look at, it's hard for you to see, our pink box to ensure that students' rights with disabilities and their parents are protected. We don't use that word here. Obviously, we've talked about why we won't say disability because dis means can't. But part of that, it's a very difficult process. Those of you that have been part of the process understand that it is challenging, right? If you've been in it as a parent or as a teacher or in any, even as a lawyer, as I'm looking at you, it is a challenging process. So part of our responsibility is to protect the parents as well as the students. And part of that is the procedural safeguards that we have in place. So parental consent for evaluations, you can't just go and evaluate students. You have to have the parents to be on board and be participants in that process. We have confidentiality of information, procedures for resolving disputes, because that does happen, as well as for discipline and procedures to protect the student within those processes. I think that's something that's important because we take that very seriously as we do this work. And then if we go on to the yellow one, which I'll read to you because I'm sitting in front of it, is to ensure educators and parents and guardians are provided with necessary tools to support technical assistance. So as you know, we have and continue to develop guidance documents, parent guide we're updating now, which we have been committed to making it very parent-friendly. If you've seen our parent guide, it is actually the friendliest that I've seen of all of them. I'm glad that you're nodding because it means that you've seen it. We also have parent representatives at IEP meetings. And one of the things that we're doing, and because this is so near and dear and personal to me, is that we're working with different institutions like Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, who will help create some videos, some resources for parents that are not guided by anyone. Because when you're in the process, it is a very emotional process, but just so the parents know what their rights are. What is my right during this process? What does it look like? So there's many resources and tools that we're developing and have developed that we're pretty excited about. The last one is to assess and ensure the effectiveness of efforts in education with children that are differently abled. So what that means is that the federal government counts on us to have continuous improvement. So we can't just say this is what we've done, and that's it. But we have to show what the effort is around that and continuously improve and move the agenda. And this is our responsibility for all kids aged 3 to 21 within our system. Okay, so within that, we as a state have to create some plans. So the state performance plan, it's required for each state. It evaluates the efforts that I was talking about, and it also looks at our baseline data, which is really important because we're measuring that they have to be measures and they have to be rigorous targets. The federal government has made tremendous shifts, not just about compliance, but also about outcomes, right? So we started looking we have the same standards for all kids, and that's something that we did very consciously, was to have this population participate in the creation of the standards, the teachers at the table as we were developing our new standards. So that report is reported to the USDE, but it's also public so that everybody has it, it's available. Then we have our annual performance report. We'll talk a little bit about these later on more in detail, but these will give us kind of the basis of the conversations on how we are performing as a state and where we're going and the things that we need to do moving forward. So these includes also data and explanation of the progress or the slippage. If you remember, and Chris will talk about it, in some places we do better and then we go down. So it moves back and forth, right? So that's it. It really looks at how we're moving forward or places where we need to continue to improve. So that also is reported publicly. The federal government has also changed its processes. So now these two are one document. They have asked us to submit it electronically, and that also is it is public. But what's interesting is, as OSEP, which is the federal government, has oversight over us, but also is supposed to provide support, so are we to districts, right? That's part of what we have to do. And each year, in order to do that, they make a determination for us. So there are 4 categories that all states can fall under. So obviously it's meets requirements, needs assistance, needs intervention, or needs substantial intervention in implementing the requirements of IDEA. So you're going to hear more about where we fall in these and how actually how it is actually laid out in our system. So for many of you, this may be a big topic for us to talk about. So at the end, it would be great if we can have questions about where we're going and where we're moving forward, because it's a topic that we all care a great deal about.
Thank you, Angelica, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to continue on and talk about New York State. New York State is currently identified by the federal government, by OSEP. So when I say OSEP, I'm referring to the federal government, the Office of Special Education Programs. And we have been identified as a state in need of assistance, for over 10 years now. And with that determination comes certain parameters that OSEP will set with us. They will advise the state of the available sources of technical assistance, which we need to avail ourselves of. They'll direct the state They'll direct the use of the state-level funds. Now, this is talking about looking at our consecutive year identification. Because we're over 2 consecutive years, this is when OSEP can put these parameters on us. So they can direct the use of our state-level funds on the areas that we have been identified in. Also, they can identify the state as a high-risk grantee and impose special conditions on our IDEA funding. So right now, we are at that first level with OSEP, and they have been directing us to the use of their targeted technical assistance to address our areas that we've been identified for. With our June 2018 IDEA determination as a state in need of assistance, like I said, OSEP advised us, they advised the department to make available the technical assistance required for us to work with appropriate entities, and they directed us to determine the results for our compliance issues as well as our performance issues and the improvement strategies that we'll put in place and focus on to really get at the reasons we are identified consecutively for over 10 years as a state in need of assistance. Through its differentiated monitoring system, which I'll refer to sometimes throughout the presentation as DMS, that's a process that OSEP has put in place which identifies areas of focus for each state based upon its data and provides increasingly intensive monitoring efforts and support for each state specific to those areas. The areas for which New York State has identified currently are up here on the slide. We have issues with longstanding noncompliance, which means at both a state level and at specific district levels, we have districts, and we'll talk a little bit more about districts in a bit. We have districts and the state with issues of longstanding noncompliance, which these are issues that have been going on for years that need to be corrected. We are also identified in the timely individual evaluation for students' eligibility for special education, both preschool and school age. So the timeliness of those evaluations being done is an issue in New York State, as well as the timeliness of the completion of due process hearings is a major issue in New York State. Again, going back to what Angelica, that is one of our protections, procedural safeguards for parents is to ensure a functional due process system, and being timely in those decisions is part of that. Our graduation and dropout rate for students with disabilities is another area we're identified for, as well as the participation of differently abled students in our state assessments, our 3 through 8 program, as well as our secondary. And this is based on data from 2016. So there is a lag between the identification and the data. If you now look at this, this slide provides, it's a quick snapshot of some very complex data that is gathered and submitted to the federal government. But it's a quick snapshot of New York's progress under each one of the indicators that are contained in our state performance plan and our annual performance report. This information, again, is based on the 2016 data, and this is the data that was used to give us our current IDEA determination as a state in need of assistance. The boxes with green checks are those indicators for which New York State has met the targets under the state performance plan. And you can see that we have a total of 3 green checks for this particular data set. And I'll talk specifically about indicator 17 in a second. That's our state systemic improvement plan, a slightly different indicator. That's designed to increase the capacity of school districts to implement and scale up effective practices in the provision of services to students with disabilities. So it's a slightly different indicator, but it's still one we're responsible for a state to set targets and meet our targets. So when you look at, we are green for indicator 2. We do meet our targets for dropout of students with disabilities, which has been declining over the years, which is a positive trajectory for that particular indicator, as well as for post-school outcomes. And real quick, post-school outcomes looks at 1 year after exiting high school, whether or not a student is enrolled in higher education or competitive employment, or if the student is enrolled in higher education, competitive employment, or participating in a training program. So it looks at all 3 levels of post-school outcomes and tracks for 1 year out. So that, and Kevin's going to talk a little bit later about some of his work around post-school outcomes. While you probably recognize most of the indicators by their name, I thought it would just take some time to quickly go through some of the indicators that you might not be familiar with because of what they're called. Okay, so just real quick, Child find refers to timely evaluations. Early childhood transition refers to when students transition from early intervention into preschool, so when they transition from the Department of Health, EI, into school-age services. Here is our preliminary 2017-18, so slight difference. To the negative, we have lost one of our areas, one of our indicators that we were making progress in. This is the preliminary performance towards our SPP APR indicator, which indicates this is based on the 2017 data. This report was submitted to OSEP by the due date of February 1st, and it's in what's called a clarification period. We'll be going back and forth with OSEP as they have questions about our report that we submitted, and we clarify our efforts to improve. So that goes on until about June 1st, in which this data will become public and be publicly released. Consistent with the previous slide, we have a significant number of red X's in which we are identifying, again, those areas that we are not meeting our targets. We anticipate that our June 2019 IDA determination will be made based on this data as well as some other data that's being looked at statewide around some areas of noncompliance, and we anticipate hopefully either remaining as a district in need of assistance and not increasing to a state in need of assistance, and not increasing to a state in need of intervention, which would be that next level up. We're now going to talk about 4 overall areas that the Office of Special Education has determined to be our priority-focused target areas. We're looking at performance, disproportionality, least restrictive environment, and transition. We are targeting our improvement efforts in these 4 areas. Each of these areas, if you back map these areas, they all connect back to all of the indicators on the previous slide. They align directly to each indicator in a way that putting our effort and energy and resources into these 4 areas, we hope will drive improvement across the state performance plan and the annual performance report. Clearly, to ensure a focus, that this work spans from early learning settings all the way through post-secondary settings. This is not just an area, and I always say it when I'm out there in the field, we cannot fix special education by just fixing special education. This is a joint effort that connects to so many other components of an educational experience for a child that we're also really looking at how we're coordinating our resources within the department, across the units, across offices, to ensure that this is a comprehensive approach to addressing these areas.
And Chris, if I just interrupt for 1 second, you'll notice in the center there, the box that identifies that if you think about these as we're talking through the data on them, they relate to components that we have included in our ESSA plan. So the concept of equity, but other issues are also included in there. So it does map back to the plan.
We're going to try and get a little fancy here. Can you click on performance, please? Thank you. Performance outcomes for which we are providing targeted support include graduation rates, dropout rates, participation in the outcomes of state assessments for school-age students with disabilities, and progress that our preschool students are making as well. For preschool, we look at positive social emotional skills and the progress students are making there. We look at the acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, including early language communication and early literacy. And we also look at the progress preschool students are making with their behaviors. So those students that exhibit behaviors and how they can, how those behaviors are being progress monitored towards behaviors that are more commensurate with their typically developing peers in the classroom. So all of that is assessed.
Can you go back for a second? Can you tell us, because you keep saying we look at, can you tell me what tools do you use to look at? You know, because that's too generic. If you could zoom in and say, we use this tool to look at this, we use, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. Well, for example, with the preschool outcomes, that is indicator 7. I don't have the list of all of them, but there are over 30 recommended assessments, nationally recognized assessments that we can use. And when I say look at, Indicator 7 is one of those indicators we call a sample indicator. So 1/6 of the school districts each year are sampled, and they use one or multiple assessments from the list that's available to assess these 3 areas. So they are nationally recognized assessments that are designed for early learning.
And we can provide the list
Yes,
of
yep.
those
And- yep.
so that you're all aware of them.
Oh, Chris, hold on one second. Go ahead.
Thank you,
Regent
Trace. And
Cashin.
today,
Wait. Hold on, Regent Cashin.
No, just, I don't know whether it's to the commissioner or to Chris. So we are, SED reports all the data in all these areas. And let's say a very large city is not in compliance all over the place, mandated services, et cetera. Do we recommend specific interventions?
Yes,
Yep.
and
Or,
that's-
or is there a choice for them who monitors it, that kind of thing? Because reporting is one thing, but following through with what are you
Make
doing?
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we have a slide specifically on those districts, Regent Cashin, that fall in that category, and then the requirements of a corrective action plan.
So I guess maybe, let me make it more targeted. So do they develop their corrective action plan? This is always my worry. When someone is not doing it, or maybe not capable of doing it, do we support them in developing a corrective action plan is my
Yes.
question?
Yes.
Or do they can just, make up their own plan and we might be back to square one?
Actually, the Office of Special Education, when we have districts that are identified for identified noncompliance in any area in special education, we actually develop the corrective action plan and impose that on the district.
And monitor whether or not they're doing it in set time limits.
Right. Yeah, we're going to change normally we wait till the end of the presentation, but I think there's so much, no. There's so much information that I think as we go through, it's best to zoom in on than to wait, because what happens is a lot of times, then we have to just go back and forth. I think Regent Mead and then Regent Collins.
So, last year, did we get this? Page 5 and 6 presented to us like this? Showing last year's data and the year before?
You had, do you remember that you had a map of New York? And I think that was given to you last year once, and then we gave you an updated one. The map of New York, and everything that was a red X there was in red, and the actual indicator was written in red, and those that were in green were written in green. We can provide that to you again, and probably would, it's actually a map with those things inserted in it.
It was regional? It was laid out regionally? Is that why there was a map involved, or?
No, but the copy of the report was also provided. Chris?
Yeah, last year you were provided by judicial district, a list of all your districts that were identified under IDEA, as well as where they fell under each one of those specific indicators.
We can send that to you again.
Yep. And that will be coming again. We produce that document every year. It's our statewide regional work plan that we provided.
Well,
It looks different because it was broken down by judicial district for you.
Well, right, I mean, and I'm sure that there are some districts that perhaps are more in compliance than others, but looking at it in the aggregate is shocking.
Actually depressing.
It's that too.
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess what I'd want to know is if we actually went back to, say, 2015-16 and did these green checks and red X's at the aggregate state level, what would that look like? Like, how far back does this go?
It goes back to 2005, 2006 was the onset of the state performance plan. It was a new requirement by the federal government.
I think Regent Mead's, your point about the period of time, I think we're looking at this for at least 10 years, if not more. So we've been in this cycle for a while, and it's a critical kind of situation. It's also, as you said, the fact that the presentation was last year, I think that part of what we need to make sure is that this becomes center, on a regular basis, because obviously the sense of urgency here is critical. And I think to the question of what instruments do we use, I think as we look at some of these indicators, the question becomes, how do we know that we are addressing some of these issues? Because I think in some cases, when we look at some of these indicators, we would almost have to say that there are some places and some spots that people, would say that we're not necessarily, correcting or getting the right information for them as part of the work. So, I know we're limited to what's here, but we do have to take that into account. I think we had Regent Collins, right? And then then Regent Otterkirk, then Norwood. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so we just opened up.
You did.
Yes, but it's okay because we have a chunk of time, and we really want to try to, originally, as you know, a lot of times we do the presentations and we wait till the end. The problem is that because we allowed a significant amount of time, right? We want to try to go through it and dig deep into some of these issues. So let me so I have this. Collins, and then I have Otterkirk. Okay. Regent Johnson was next, right?
I had my hand up 5
Okay,
minutes
so Regent Reyes, we're going to put you ahead of Regent Johnson. Okay, then Regent Reyes, Regent Johnson, Regent Midler, Norwood. Sia, okay. Okay, did I leave? Okay.
And if your question is something that we know is in a coming slide,
Then hold it,
We'll
right.
tell you
Right.
it's coming up,
So
and then
it's,
we can respond.
yeah, so
then.
let's just stay with this issue, and then we'll go through, okay, Regent Collins?
Thank you for bringing this report to us, because I've been waiting for, how long has it been since we actually looked at our special education plan for the state of New York? It's been years. And meanwhile, things have just deteriorated. And I'm looking for information that gives me a look at my 8th judicial district and all of the schools that's in it that's not meeting these indicators, especially when I look at 8 and 9 and 10. Those are very important to me, but I want to pinpoint, and I'm concerned about every kid in the state, but I want to pinpoint Judicial District 8. I'd like to know which schools are not meeting the compliance requirements, and if we have a plan from that school district. It means more to me when I can see where I can be of assistance in my districts if I know that the IPEs are not being followed as I'm told by so many people who are coming up to me and saying, look, they're warehousing those kids up on the 5th floor. No one is taking care of them. They just bring them in and send them to the 6th floor, and no one is supporting them. And you all know that people in your district come to you and they will blow them away and tell us, because they expect us to do something about it. If they're not following those IEPs, and a lot of them are not, based on a lot of folks who talk to me, I'm concerned that I don't have a list of those schools. Therefore, then we can focus in on them and assist the parents in understanding what they have to do. And I tell my parents, if you don't believe that your child should be in special ed, have them tested. And have them tested outside the school. Find out what's going on with your kid. I mean, that's important to me. If I had a child that had a need And the school kept, giving me the runaround. And I've been keenly involved with this. And not everyone has, well, I've been keenly involved with this. And I want to make sure that the kids are taken care of. Following those IEPs is one of the downfalls, I think, of many districts. And so we need to give us something that's relevant to us. Thank you for putting it together. Thank you, because I've complained so much about special ed constantly. Ever since I've been here, going on 4 years, I've been complaining about special ed. And I've asked for assistance from the office. And I've gotten it. And I've been told that we're working on it. Here's the plan. We're working on it. I'm glad we're tying it back to ESSA plan, right, because that's important, because that's the muscle we have. We have the ESSA plan, and if we could tie all these things together. But I want to see a list of the schools in not just district. I want to know the schools in my various districts that are not meeting these indicators.
We'll get that report to you, Regent Collins.
Regent Odegaard?
Thank you.
I'm struggling with this. Having been in special education as a teacher for the bulk of my teaching, having a grandson who has a special need in being hearing impaired, and now he's a young man trying to struggle through because he doesn't belong with the deaf community, nor does he belong with the regular hearing community. So I've been the CSE chair, I've been the grandmother sitting there pretending I don't do anything else. Somebody asks me, and then they say, we knew you were more than his grandma. And my briefcase might have been part of it because I had the laws we might need that day. We didn't need them. I had called the superintendent, so I'm sure that they were aware of my role. But if we've been doing these things for 10 years, why didn't something change? If we were checking all these things that we're hearing about here, why didn't some kind of change happen? And I asked that question, Commissioner, because
It's an excellent question. I mean, many of you have been around the table much longer than I, and I think we all have this responsibility to bring this forward and to move on making sure that districts are doing the work. I want to point out an important part of the movement forward has to be the response that districts must provide to parents in any situation. And a number of us have had situations where we are advocates for our children, our grandchildren, or our friends. And I would say to you that this is a responsibility that we have. And what happens is sometimes the changes that are necessary obviously are not occurring, which is why you continue to have, in our position as New York State, you continue to have the red checks. And we have to look at each of those and make sure that particularly the districts that have had this for multiple years are identified, they understand the seriousness of it, and that they are put on from our perspective, with a cap, a corrective action plan to make sure that they understand they have to move these things. So this is something that, as Chancellor said, and we've seen this. I will say that, we had many things that we've been working on. And as you know, special education and the needs of the students in many conversations has come up. We've made some significant changes to make sure that they received opportunities after they left school. But the reality is, this is from the pre-K programs through, and it needs to have our full attention, which is we're bringing this to you. Then we will come back later with the second part of the implementation, and we really underscore the importance of it.
I have one more question I would like to ask. There's been a lot of change in SED in that period of 10 years.
Yes, there has.
Major positions that relate to special
Yes.
education. We also, I'm just going to honestly say it, we fight the fight with DOB on what we feel we need for money. We fight it all the time, and we don't get it. Is there a way that we can connect some of our identification by the feds as we need the money because for this reason, this reason, and this reason. I go back there because in some of my history, I was a DS, happened to be in Western New York. Happens that I did teams that went into Buffalo.
Yes.
And somebody tried to muzzle me there, and they weren't successful. And yet, did we have any impact? I took a team in there. A kid was murdered in the street outside of that school the next day after we left. Just horrendous stuff. They said they couldn't find transportation for us. I said, are you kidding me? I live in Leroy. And I said, there's mass transportation. So they said, we'll send a limousine. I thought, that's all I need to go into some of the neighborhoods in Buffalo in a limousine. I said, no, thank you. So they ended up hiring somebody in Leroy to come and pick us up and go. It was just horrendous stuff. They had a room adjacent to the school. They gave me some phony excuse. It was all special ed kids that were being funneled out there. Horrendous stuff. That's a long time ago. You know, we're just getting further and further behind for these children. And yet, you know, and the commissioner and I have had this conversation. My grandson is now 24. He has normal intelligence. The thing that's faulty is his hearing. He finally got a job at Bristol Myers in Syracuse. Some of you may know it. Well, he was having some trouble because it's in a department with some chemicals, and so all the employees have to wear something across their mouth. So the lip reading that saves him many times, he couldn't even see. So he mentioned it to his dad, and his dad said, you need to advocate for yourself. He said, I can't do that, Dad. Well, something happened, and a supervisor talked to Nick and then said, we're going to pull the department together, Nick. And everybody there said, thank you so much. They had no idea what struggle Nick was going through to do the ordinary things, much less the extraordinary. And he has the intelligence for the extraordinary. We just don't even see, even in the family, I feel like I've been negligent in helping serve my grandson. So when I see stuff like this and somebody says, it's been happening for 10 years, it's been happening for longer than that. And we need to make it happen, and it's going to take money to do so. Sorry.
Okay, Regent Cottrell?
Okay. You know, I think we all regret that we haven't acted on this sooner. But frankly, I've been here 8 years, and last month was the first time I saw all the red dots. Was the first time I saw those. So it's not an excuse. It's just saying that we have to be aware before we can act. I think on these check sheets, there are 2 or 3 things that stand out. And page 4 and 5 say timely initial individual evaluations and early childhood transition. And this has garnered a lot of interest in letter writing. I've gotten numerous letters about what we shouldn't be doing and what's currently in place. So I think we should be careful not to break a system, part of the system that might be working. And I'm not as familiar with the ECDC as some people here, but it sounds like the initial intake is very important for this program, and it's going to be diluted by the new program we're instituting. So I think we've got to be very careful not to dismantle something that's working.
I just want to clarify, so that part of this type of discussion will be coming in the coming months. We're in a restricted period on the procurement for that issue.
Right. Yeah. I think to rephrase, I think it's if we honor the restricted silence period. So let's put that aside. But I do think that Regent Cottrell's point about in general, let's not look at a system and take maybe things that are working in general. And create a situation that creates additional problems that we may see down the road as part of, unintended consequences. So while we cannot get involved in some discussions because we are in a restrictive period, I think as we look at this layout and this plan, one, I think you made the point of saying you've never seen this. What happens a lot of times is that if something is not, I mean, I think everybody around this table would say you're familiar with ESSA because we've been all intimately, constantly engaged in ESSA. I think this, some of you are saying, as I think Regent Mead said, this is feeling new. And I think that's a fair statement by both of you. At the same time, I think there's a third component in saying that as we look at these issues, let's make sure that we constantly keep this in terms of center and as important, but that we also are mindful and thoughtful. That's why I asked the question about what's the evidence that we use to make sure that something is working or not working. We've got to have the evidence. And so in looking at the work that we do, that we make the kinds of judgments that we make based on things that are working and things that are not working.
Madam Chancellor, before we go on, I think it might be beneficial to ask counsel to say a little bit about what she referred to as restricted period.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I'm not so sure that everyone understands what that is. It is vitally important that we fully appreciate what that means and avoid violating it as a matter of law. But counsel, would you mind sharing
Sure.
a little bit on that?
Sure. The restricted period under state finance law is the period of time between when the agency begins a contract solicitation or advertises that we're going to be in that process, and it ends when the contract is awarded or if the agency decides to discontinue the process and not make an award. And so on the issue that Regent Cottrell had raised, we are in a restricted period right now for a procurement, and that's why we can't discuss it publicly. There are rules in the state finance law about how those types of communications are supposed to happen, and we can provide you more information on that. But the department would have a staff contact so that all of our conversations and communications are regulated.
A point of information, what about dismantlement? Is there some kind of restriction against that, or can it just be done?
I think so let me the conversation, just so we're very clear that council is talking about, is that if we're looking to reorganize the chairs on the Titanic, we have to hold that conversation until such time as the new chairs are identified and how we're going to reshuffle, reorganize. So I think that's, council is speaking to the issue that there is an RFP out there that will define the new way of doing work. And so she's advising the board that we don't engage in any conversation in terms of this presentation that is connected to that possibility, whatever that possibility will end up. And that's when the commissioner was talking about the next conversation. Now, I do think that you've made three statements that I think they're on the borderline. I don't think it's problematic to say we've received a lot of emails and about a particular kind of situation that is impacted. I do think that the idea that when we look at this, that we have evidence to show as we make adjustments or changes, that we use solid evidence to support those changes is a generic, because that's true about anything we do. So, thank you. Regent Reyes.
Yes, thank you. I want to make reference to just the context of disproportionality, which comes up.
Which page are you on, Regent Reyes?
I'm trying to find disproportionality is indicator 9 on page 5.
Yes.
but it's also an area, a target area on page 7,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think it's discussed on 9. I'm not sure that we got there.
No, we didn't get there yet, but it is there.
But I want to be clear that
Yes.
on page 7,
Right.
and in the notes, it's referenced as disproportionality relating to race and ethnicity. And I suggest, and I don't know if it's legal or not, that disproportionality with regards to language, meaning students who are Ls, are they disproportionately represented in the special ed category because they've been referred, they've been determined, and is it disproportional, and is that part of a plan of improvement? Because it seems to me in some areas in New York, when you look at districts and you see 35% of Ls having IEPs, that appears to me to be disproportionate compared to all of the other districts. And so I want to make sure that the plan is such that we can be pinpointed in looking at whether students are not being or are being less disproportionately counseled or put into the evaluation system and misdiagnosed.
Yeah, Regent Reyes, we still have, just for the record, we still have Jose P., and we still have, once upon a time, we had Laura, and Laura's still somewhere. But we do have somewhere, we still have issues of, overrepresentation based on language, race,
And the federal government holds us accountable.
Yes, even poverty.
Should they hold us accountable to both federal law as well as to local law?
Correct. And they still hold us accountable for testing children at grade levels regardless of what the IEP states. So let's be clear that that's a waiver that is still, hanging out there somewhere, because we do have many children that are subjected to assessments when we know that a battery of tests, an IEP has been developed, and in some cases, it's an 8th grader that is on a 3rd grade level, and yet we have to give them the standardized test at their grade level. We have not resolved that one, both from an advocacy, and we have not resolved that in terms of the requirement from the feds. While the IEP says one thing, the fact of the matter is that we act very surprised every year why the students are not performing, when in fact there is a disconnect of two bodies of data and knowledge. Next, we have...
Can I just speak to Regent Reyes' point real quick?
Sure.
Because the actual state performance plan doesn't actually get at disproportionality for differently able students that are also English language learners, it doesn't mean we're not doing anything. We have recognized at a department level that that is an area that may not be getting captured by the federal government right now under the state performance plan. It is an area that we're concentrating on with between Lisette and my office to really look at that population of students and how we can really do better by how we evaluate, identify, and service that population. Do you want to add, Lisette?
Right, and I think that's why I'm sitting here today. As you can see, our students who are differently able, that are also English language learners, have an increase in graduation rate, 6.6% from the cohort 2013 and 14. However, when you see the gap between the general ed and our students who are English language learners and differently able, it remains, right? It's 56.5. So I think that to Chris's point and Regent Reyes, the work that Chris and I have been doing is precisely to focus in this area and bring that sense of urgency, not just around plans, but also decisions that we're making, ensuring that there are professional learning opportunities for educators around language acquisition versus a disability, talking about bilingual evaluations that are so critical in this process, the identification as well, and also looking at cultural and linguistic response interventions, right? And so we are ensuring that our educators not only have those professional learning opportunities, but also creating resources that they are able to use to be able to meet the unique needs of this population.
Thank you.
In addition,
I'm sorry.
The only point I would like.
Because I know you're going to go back to that, so.
No, the only
yeah, go
point I
ahead.
wanted to make is that the ESSA plan and implementation of it becomes one of the bases of our being reported to, and this is another base. And the concern is that ESSA and the students with disabilities federal plan issues, our reports should not depend just on the federal requirement.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
should be getting that information. If it's separate
Right.
from, then fine, but we don't have to wait to get, the federal government to tell us that things are a problem, for us to find out that we have problems and that we
Right.
have solutions for them.
Right. Yeah, and I think it goes back to the issue of the two buckets. You know, you have the Ls and you have the special ed, but you also have a crossover, and the crossover are students that are Ls that also are special needs. And that crossover can get very complicated because a lot of the instruments are problematic in some cases, and the way it's captured is in some cases. And, there's always the question, is it a language issue? Is it a disability? Is it a combination? And that adds to the complication of this process. And I don't believe that we've done a good job in making sure that we have individuals and staff trained, as well as individuals who really have a knowledge of this particular specialty.
Chancellor, if I may, I
Sure.
just want to share two more things that we're doing in this area. As Chris mentioned, we have been working together to focus on this, and the Office of Special Education has recently hired Dr. Olga de Jesus, which is an expert in this area, precisely because we want to stress the urgency and create an initiative that truly meets the needs of this population, as well as ensuring that our teachers, that we increase the number of teachers that are capable of providing instruction that truly meets the needs of students.
Yeah, she's obviously listening to us because she texted and said, Regent Johnson?
I'm still trying to understand this. Is this summative information based on all districts reporting?
Yes, and indicators, actually, it's all based on district data. Indicators 1 through 14 are direct reports from districts to us that we then report to the federal
So do we
government.
collect this data on an annual basis?
Yes.
And we've been collecting the same data for 10 years, and we're still identified as a state in need of assistance? I don't understand how that could be. We have an ESSA plan, and before that, a No Child Left Behind plan that targeted schools after 2 and 3 years.
And we did target them. I agree with you, Regent Johnson. So they all know the data. They get reports on the fact that they are not in compliance and that they're out of, in any one of those indicators where they are not doing well. What we haven't done is been more directive and overseeing whether or not they're making the change.
So they
We see it
report
most
this
of the time.
every
Yes,
year.
comes
but-
from the school district.
Comes from the school districts, but we haven't really been able to provide them with the support they need to turn this around, or something. There's a missing piece here. Here's my last question. Okay, my last question. How many hundreds of thousands of children have been damaged as a result of this? Do we collect data on the number of students who, as a result of this failure, are not having their educational needs met? And I would like to know if we can identify that number. Think about who these young people are. I've been a superintendent for 10 years. I don't recall ever seeing anything like this come across my desk, which would have been a red flag. That doesn't mean, by the way, I'm looking at some of these indicators and saying, oh, I recognize some of this. Now, maybe we responded to it, maybe we didn't, but 10 years of being told that you're not meeting the needs of thousands of students in your district, and we end up being cited by the federal government, which is not necessarily a friend of special ed. So I'm even stunned that they decided to cite us, because they've been trying to avoid some of the outcomes that they now are responsible for. It's going to be pretty serious for that department in Washington to make a decision to cite a state. So I am just totally confused as to how we managed not to know this, but it's been going on for 10 years. And I realize you're new and you've been here for, I recognize that. So you have to help us reflect on, how could this have happened?
Thank you, Regent Johnson. Regent Midler?
I wanted to look, I realize we've had a long discussion and there's so many questions. I just want to get a little specific about some of my concerns on some of the indicators. For example, least restrictive environment.
Now, which page are you on, Regent?
I'm 6.
6, okay, got it. Okay.
Least restrictive environment, school age. I am familiar with a number of schools who have gone through the RTI process, who have gone through the appropriate time evaluation, and they literally do not have a space for the child, because least restrictive does not necessarily mean in the mainstream classroom. It should be least restrictive for the level of the student that we're assessing and evaluating. And what's happening is these children are put on wait lists, and then they have to be in the classroom, and the teachers do not have the support they need to provide for this child, many of whom, especially in the younger ages, have social emotional issues, are runaways. You know, they head for the door every minute you can, or they bite, which is in fact endangering many of the other children with needs in the classroom. There's no out. And what happens is, in many situations, the teacher is then labeled as not competent or in need of assistance. And they do need assistance because they've got 20 or 25 other children in the room. I'm really concerned, first, for the professional who does not know or does not have the resources to get assistance. I'm really worried about the other children who then formulate this idea that any child who is different in their learning style, whether it be language or behavior, is then, it starts a real bias, an inherent bias. And that we're not doing right because we owe these children a placement, and we have parents who are being told, we are working on it. It takes 10 weeks to go through the assessment. 10 weeks in the life of a 5-year-old is like forever. And so I have a real concern about how we can address this requirement, and in fact, how we're measuring least restrictive environment. In many cases, we put the child in what we call the normal or the general classroom and say, least restrictive environment. So that definition and the indicators to me are a real concern. I don't know what we can do about it, but I am really concerned about it. Early childhood transition, I know that a lot is going on right now, but I'm concerned about the process is inequitable. We're looking at making the transition, is it because they're chronologically old enough or developmentally old enough, or what the capability is, and do we have the support system for the children to make the transition? And how do we then help the parent? Because the parent involvement is higher than I think we assume, but what that involvement looks like is an issue to me. I don't know what that means. Does that mean that we've had the parent come to the meeting? That is an involvement of sort, but it may not be an understanding of what's going on. This is their baby. And I've yet to meet a parent who doesn't consider their child the most important, most loved individual. They may not do good parenting as we define it, but they're there. So what do we do to help them understand what they can do so they don't feel helpless? I have more, but those are the ones that are most concerning to me, especially speaking from the teacher's viewpoint, that sometimes you just don't know what to do, and there is no support from the district because they have so many children who are at a much higher level of need, and so those marginal children are completely ignored. And I hate sixth-floor rooms. I don't.
Thank you, Regent Medley. Okay, so we're gonna put a pause here for a second, just so we can kind of get through. Then we have Regent Norwood, Sia, Cashin, Vice Chancellor Chin as the next phase, just to kind of get us through to the end of the, because obviously it's clear from this conversation, we did allow, and we've actually have added an extra half hour, knowing that this is very extremely important conversation. So if you can continue and.
Move forward? All right.
What?
You want to come off?
Norwood
Come on,
is
go
the
back.
first one. Good.
So now if you look at, we're going to go into, very quickly, I'm going to talk a little bit about disproportionality, and then we will get to least restrictive environment is one of the boxes we'll talk a little bit about.
No. I figure let's just.
So, under the state performance
Chris,
plan.
I just want to say, could you flip back one slide?
Sure.
I want to bring to your attention, under performance outcomes, where we just had that slide with the graduation rate.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we always provide this disaggregated data in the graduation rate data. We also do dropout.
Yeah.
And we also, any data that we have slides specifically on this issue. So we will be bringing this back to you specifically in the context of the special education students, but you will be able to see as you go through slides through the year, you'll see the data that comes out that specifically relates to students with disabilities. Thank you, Chris.
Next slide.
Go forward, yeah.
Yes.
There we go.
No, he already did that one.
Yep.
Keep going.
This one.
Okay.
Yep. The workaround, the department's work around disproportionality, which we look at, addresses equity and access in education. It focuses on how we can systemically address policies, practices, and procedures, as well as the instruction that's being provided to students that have resulted. What are the issues in those policies, practices, and procedures in districts that are resulting in a disproportionate representation? And we look at three areas: a disproportionate representation by race and ethnicity in general being placed in special education. We also look at it by classification categories. So are there more students being identified under specific classification categories by race and ethnicity, as well as the placements of these students? Are they in more restrictive placements versus less restrictive?
Okay.
So that's indicator 9 and indicator 10 on the other chart, as well as indicator 4. That's way at the end.
Somebody's clicking here.
I'll try and go back.
Okay, that one,
There.
I was going to say yeah,
Click on
keep
this.
going. No, you're past that. You're past.
Click on that. There we
Oh,
go.
yeah, you
Yep.
passed
So what we
that.
do when we work with districts is we look at and identify the root causes of the problems when we go into schools. We look at the school-wide approaches and the interventions that they may or may not have in place as part of our review. And we also look at, are they implementing these policies consistent across all students, or are they truly treating certain groups of students differently when it comes to special education? So it's not, for us, it's those three categories. We are also looking at our English language learners now in the work we're doing with Lisette, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this particular area, and it is really very district-specific. So when I do get you the data out specific to your districts, you'll be able to see the ones that are identified under the indicators that have them identified for disproportionate practices.
And since you didn't have pre-K for 10 years, and we've seen the last 3 years, such a large number, are you making sure that you're looking at that separately and incorporating it?
Yep.
Regent Reyes, I'm sorry. We're just trying to honor the.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, if we can come out of this one.
Okay.
And we're going to talk quickly about least restrictive environment. It's another major priority area for the Office of Special Education. Here, we're ensuring that our students with disabilities are educated in the least restrictive environment, and it was mentioned at the table, that's different for every student based on their needs. For some students, it's full participation in general education, and for some students, it's possibly participation in a special class or a separate setting. But we really do look at, when we work with school districts, is We look at their classroom configurations. We look at are they being held to the same expectations when we go into classrooms and schools? We're looking at are our teachers that are collaborating in those classrooms intentionally planning? It's not just placing students or differently abled students into a classroom, but it's actually creating a classroom that's inclusive for all students, ensuring that they had their individualized supports, as well as use of evidence-based services is something we look at through the protocols and looking at least restrictive environment. I'm going to go quick.
Kevin?
And transition planning and services, I'm going to talk, we do focus on this area very, very highly. It's one of our major priority areas. We look to build capacity in schools to ensure that they have effective transition planning and services. And again, another office we collaborate closely with on this is for when they move out of high school and into post-secondary. Kevin's office plays a major role in that.
Thank you, Chris. I want to preface my comments by saying that all of our children in P12 are being prepared for the rest of their lives. We have these young people in special education for the rest of their lives, and nothing is more important to their independence than employment. So going back to indicator 13 and 14, when a special education student is not prepared for post-secondary education and is not prepared for employment, they suffer for the rest of their lives. Employment rates among individuals with disabilities are very low. In the box on what is my right, you can see that labor statistics, national labor statistics indicate an 8% unemployment among people with disabilities or differently abled adults. That's twice the number that we currently have with individuals who are not disabled. However, the employment rate of people with disabilities hovers in the mid-30s. So what's the gap? The gap is that nearly 60% of adults are considered not available for work. We know many are. We know many should be. In many instances, it's a matter of disability advisement. They receive benefits through Medicaid and other sources, Social Security, and we have simply not done a good job of assuring that if a person with a disability who is eligible for those benefits relinquishes their right to that disability, to that benefit in order to become employed, is protected, is safeguarded. For the last 5 years, vocational rehabilitation has been fully engaged in serving a greater number of youth with disabilities. Of the 58,602 participants enrolled in 2017, 55% are youth. Access VR, as you know, has district offices and New York State Education Department staff deployed across the state to provide direct counseling and employment services to our differently abled neighbors. Of the 722 New York State Education Department staff who work in vocational rehabilitation, 302 are vocational rehabilitation counselors, and an additional 63 are senior voc rehab counselors. All of them are now serving younger participants. Accordingly, we are more involved with secondary schools, committees on special education, families, and our special education colleagues. With the reauthorization of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act in 2014, and as we have reported previously, VR is now required to provide pre-employment transition services to all youth age 14 to 21, regardless of their enrollment status. Up until this point, only an individual who was enrolled in vocational rehabilitation could receive services. Each of our enrolled individuals are an individual cost center. Counselors can only authorize resources to that enrolled individual until 2014. That's changed with PREETs, what we know as PREETs. This means that all special education students are eligible to receive these services. As the slide shows, the services that we need to make available to these individuals. Mm-hmm. Job exploration and counseling, work-based learning experiences, counseling on post-secondary, workplace readiness training, instruction in self-advocacy. As you can see, these services align with special education indicators 13 and 14, and as we roll these services out, we anticipate better compliance and performance in these two indicators. I think you witnessed, too, with the 16-17 data and the check boxes moving to the 17-18, We went from a green check on 14 to a red check on 14. That's how close to the borderline we are on that one indicator. Again, our intervention, our cooperation and partnership, we hope to see stability in that indicator and in others.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
You have the data under the state performance plan. Another set of data that you need to be familiar with is the number of districts that get identified each year under IDEA as not meeting the requirements of IDEA, and the state does those identifications. There are a total of 44 districts currently identified as not meeting those requirements. New York State makes its annual IDEA determinations based on consideration of both performance outcomes and compliance status for the subgroup of differently abled students. If a district has a compliance identification, it means that they are 12 or more months of unresolved noncompliance. We as a state must ensure that any identified noncompliance is resolved within 12 months, and there are times when districts and programs go over that threshold, and then we have to continue our enforcement action with them, but it actually creates a situation that gets them identified under IDEA. We also identify districts under performance, and consistent with past practice, with ESSA now in place, we have aligned our accountability system for performance of the subgroup of differently able students with the ESSA accountability. So we are basing that on the district-wide performance of differently able students at the elementary, middle, and at the secondary and/or at the secondary level. And we will conduct targeted technical assistance as well as monitoring for that regulatory compliance in the areas that are identifying these districts. So this just breaks down. We have 27 districts in New York State that are currently identified as needs assistance, and we have 17 districts in New York State that are currently identified for needs intervention. You can look at the difference between 12 and 24 months of noncompliance unresolved, needs intervention, you are 24 months and over, as well as the amount of time that you spend consecutive years identified in a particular area may trigger you to be elevated to the next tier. This is a breakdown of the 44 districts by performance and compliance. You can see that we have 11 districts statewide that are identified. Of the 44, 11 are identified for compliance, 30 are identified for performance only, and we got 3 districts in New York State that are identified for both performance and compliance. Additionally, we have identified 12 districts that have consecutive year identifications of 8 or more years. Identified under IDEA as either needs assistance or needs intervention. We are going to conduct a coordinated intervention in each one of those districts, which will involve a meeting with the leadership of each one of those 12 districts with that consecutive year identification, and looking at what we have to do from a compliance assurance plan perspective and or a professional development, comprehensive professional development plan with those 12 districts to ensure that we can resolve the issues that are getting them, some of them 8, 10, 13 years identified under IDEA. So we're taking a different approach with those long-standing consecutive year districts under IDEA.
This you've spent time on, so, and it's from 2015.
This, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Should we go? So I'm trying to get so that
Yep.
we have Regent's time.
Yep.
Okay.
So if we could go to
The only thing is go back to the 30, where you have performance. That's your largest chunk, and that's really high-stakes performance.
Correct. And when we go in those districts, you also see that there could also, we then identify compliance issues in their systems that are contributing to the performance. So sometimes we reveal quite a bit of systems issues that we need to work on in that bucket of districts, yes.
Right, okay. All right. Okay, so let's get to,
Go to the next.
yep,
Okay.
yep.
Good. The State Systemic Improvement Plan, known as the SIP, is a requirement. It's indicator 17 on the chart, the X's and checks. We report our progress on our SIP to the federal government. It's separate from the annual performance report that we sent in February. April 1, this is due to the federal government. It's a multi-year achievable plan designed to increase the capacity of school districts and the state and develop and develop a professional development framework to improve performance of students with disabilities. The focus is on improving literacy outcomes of students classified as students with learning disabilities and supporting schools in the development and refinement of multi-tiered systems of support. The first 6-year cycle of the SIP is coming to a close in April of 2020. At that point, we will meet with the federal government, and they'll look at the progress we've made under our state systemic improvement plan and what changes may be made to scale up the interventions that we have identified as effective in schools and making a difference and moving forward. Just so you know, this was a 5-year plan that the federal government came in around year 3 and asked us to revise our plan to ensure that it was something that was manageable by the state to ensure that it's something that we can scale up moving forward, as opposed to we had a very broad plan for about 3 years, and we were not really measuring the progress of our effectiveness of the interventions we were doing in districts. So we met with them, and we have revised that to the state systemic improvement plan you see now, which is very targeted and focused in particular schools.
Okay. All right? Yeah.
The Office of Special Education has considered its own internal structure over the past year and a half, 2 years that I have been in this position, and how we allocate our resources as we strive to improve supports to districts, programs, parents, and others. We have reorganized the units within this Office of Special Education under a new management structure. We have ensured that there's coordination and collaboration between our monitoring, professional development, and program implementation units. As we move forward, we'll continue to look at our internal structure to ensure that it is supporting the field in a way that's delivering high-quality services is our vision.
Okay. Thank
Across the units and offices that we are working with to implement systems that yield high-quality instructional delivery, interventions that are matched to student need, and finally using the data that we put before you to really drive our decision-making and the improvement and the interventions that we put in place and the way we monitor. We are looking at a continuous examination and improvement processes, and we're supporting the use of the culturally responsive and sustaining practices, and looking at our office now, which was very school-age focused, to looking at how we have a full scope of early learning through post-secondary for our differently abled populations.
And so, if you recall, in December, we presented to you the cultural responsive and sustaining education framework.
Oh, yeah.
The field is really loving this piece of information that will allow them to actually affirm, right, the cultural identity and linguistic diversity of our students. And so, in support of the work that districts and schools are going to be doing in this area, we are creating resources. We have scheduled to present webinars around how to create a curriculum that truly is in alignment with the framework. We also thinking about and have a plan for advocating the partnership with institutions and stakeholders that would allow us to continue to create opportunities for teachers to understand how are they going to do this. We understand that the framework is now in a moment where we need to create those professional learning opportunities and resources for teachers. And so we are hoping that at the end of this school year, you will see some of those resources already in place and teachers already taking advantage of those opportunities.
Thank you. Okay, so before we go to Region Norwood, let's just,
I'm sorry, one final statement. And I'm the closer.
What did you say? You're not the closer? Oh, you're the closer.
So on the outer circle, as we all know, all students should be provided with fair and equitable access to a full range of education and employment opportunities. Given the troublesome compliance and performance results, some of them chronic, it is clear that there is a lot of work to do.
Thank you. Okay, so on that, Kevin, Thank you. I think one of the conversations, and it's not obviously in terms of the ongoing process, is we really have to, for those around this table know this is an area that I know very well from many different angles. And the biggest issue we have is that we have a cycle, if you will, in terms of students being over-identified, identified early, and then placed in some settings that really clearly do not necessarily allow them to exit from some of those settings. The other problem is that when we use an instrument like the high-stakes test to identify performance, it really is in many, many ways an instrument that gives us a lack of comfort, because in many situations, these are kids that, by the very nature of the IEP, by the very nature of many of the indicators that bring them to the CSEs, we know that by the time we subject them to taking these tests, that in fact they are going to experience another failure. And so we are in many ways touting or holding up, because of how this whole system is arranged with the federal, as well as our relationship in this conversation. We are in many ways gathering information about failure that continues this narrative. And it's very disconcerting to know that we just keep reporting 30 districts for performance, and we say that's the bulk. We say that that they're, we're telling these districts that you are failing, in essence, and they're failing if you have a high concentration of students that are going to not perform well on the high-stakes test. It's an automatic, So in some ways, the identification process is very, in some ways, I sit here and I say, well, what do we expect? And the emperor has no clothes, because in fact, in this kind of a situation, we have districts that have a concentration of special needs kids, and we have particularly the urban centers. The urban centers, by the very nature of the large concentration, are impacted by these issues. So we really have to be vigilant in this identification process, and we really have to get to the feds, because in essence what we're doing is we are turning out, we are giving information that we're required, but the compliance part of it, we are becoming compliance monitors, if you will, versus instructional, and I think that's the attempt that this office is trying to get to. And the problem is that if you misdiagnose, guess what? The end result is going to continue to be what it is. I will yield to Regent Norwood.
Thank you very much, Madam Chancellor. And not only did you do so with a wonderful framing, but you affirmed why I joined our colleagues in so unanimously re-electing you to your leadership position. I mean that to say that I think that those who have been listening to this conversation might very well have had ample reason to join colleagues who have voiced publicly, what have we been doing? We've been doing nothing. And I really appreciate your wisdom of just reminding us that what we have been doing is, unfortunately, just simply acting in our administrative capacity from the lens of administering a system that improves special education outcomes, instead of focusing on the broader mission of ensuring the skills, the knowledge, and the opportunity for all children to reach their best and highest potential. And I think it's important to just state for the record that the staff of the department have absolutely responded to that challenge. And all of us have watched Angelica's incredible work. And she and Joan have absolutely broken down the silo that used to exist between general education and special education so that we can begin to actually do the work which is at the top of slide 8, address equity and access through systemic actions. And that has not just been the work of staff, I would submit for the record, but this Board of Regents has provided the clear clarion call for that to occur. Regent Tillis, on the day I joined this board, was making the argument as the chair in this issue area that we needed to really move towards identifying the roots of the problem. And I've had the pleasure of serving every single second as a regent with the colleague sitting to my left, the distinguished regent from Staten Island, who has been a champion for getting us to understand if we're really going to make a difference in this area, it is not going to be through SED alone. We need a partnership with OPWD, with the Department of Health, with counties as well as with school districts that we need to fix early intervention. It has been our determined clarion call for a broader, more focused look at the root of the problem and systemic solutions to bring about change that I think has brought staff to really saying they have to present the data to us in a different way. And I think it's fantastic that they have presented the data to us in a way that brings us right to the rub. This is unacceptable. The status quo can no longer be tolerated. And I think I would just submit that my disappointment in the presentation is that the rest of the slide deck in our conversation doesn't follow from slide 8. And I think that we should be really thinking about the incredible work that we have done under the leadership of Regent Reyes and Regent Young around the Early Childhood Commission. How it is that we have leveraged the first 1,000 days to say, how do we begin to take that Medicaid dollar and drive meaningful change? Right now across the state, the private insurers are beginning to wrestle with what is their responsibility under the Behavioral Health Children's Home. We have vital opportunity to think about radically re-altering the 0 to 5 space. This has been our journey. We've been the champions of it. So that children, particularly those at birth or in utero, who have been identified as having unique needs, are supported in a way that the access to care is continuous, is open, is comprehensive, and recognizes those children's socioeconomic reality.
Don't cross the line. As you said, birth, you know. Just don't cross the line. Otherwise, Allison will be called back again. So
I would just submit that the opportunity to have the meaningful conversation has been sparked here, and I would really beg us to not lose the moment and not to believe that our work so far has been in vain. I truly believe that the stillest waters are the waters that are running deep. This is an issue on which this Board of Regents has been moving deeply and profoundly. I beg us to not be discouraged, but rather to continue the work that we have begun.
Regent Sia?
Well, I was going to say exactly what my colleague said. No, not, of course. But I was going to talk about the 10 years, but I'm not, because we already talked about that. I'm just going to talk a little bit about myself and my daughter. She was one of the first children to go to public school under PL 94, 142, I always make a mistake. And the first group of children to get an IEP, which no one told us at that time how important it was, and it was a legal document. I don't know if parents still know that, but I was disappointed all the time she was there because there were changes all the time in instruction, all the time in teachers, in everything. And I have to say, as a regent sitting at this table and hearing this out of compliance information, I'm still disappointed. And that's my closing.
Okay, thank you. Regent Cashin?
Well, how many years in my life I've sat at meetings like this? We go over the data, we go over the data. Years. But there was one time, Judy was with me, Betty was with me. It's one time where we came up with, well, what now? Well, we came up with kind of a solution. Under Chancellor Levy, who's now deceased, he had weekly conference calls with the superintendents. And he would discuss attendance. And he would compliment those that really are starting to grow and hold accountable those that weren't. And he'd go through the whole process of what we need to work on. And publicly, in our group of superintendents, we were held accountable. And if you didn't improve, you were called in. And you were asked to, we had lead superintendents. And that was just beginning when his tenure ended, when Mayor Bloomberg came in. That would have been groups of superintendents meeting with one superintendent, not a supervisor, and go over the data weekly. And discuss, not just go over the data. I'm so sick of seeing the data. We need to go over the strategies. What are you doing to improve the attendance? Did you send school aids? I sent school aids. I don't know if that was kosher, but the school aides went to houses knocking on the doors. And we had tons of calls made for attendance, because if you don't have kids in school, you can't improve anything. And if you have them in school, every boat starts to rise. So a thought to us for consideration might be, enough of the data. We know the data. We know the data. Now what? Let's do a model where we have lead superintendents in quadrants throughout the state, conference calls, sharing strategy, not just going over the data. What are we doing about it? What strategy did you do that worked? What strategy did you do that didn't work? And then rethink it and come back. Constant communication, constant pedagogic communication, and a support of colleagues. It worked. I was in Brownsville. My attendance flew. And everything improves if you improve attendance. And everything improves if you have a vehicle of superintendents talking, meeting, discussing, strategizing plans, and going over the results of those plans. See, that's what's bothering me. How many years have we listened to the data? Not that we don't. I don't mean to demean. You did a beautiful job. And the portrayal was beautiful. Now what? That's what I want to talk about next. Now what? How do we do it? Maybe a group of superintendents in one quadrant of the state commission, chancellor, where one of them leads it, goes over the data. Now what are you doing about this? Weekly. Weekly. It worked. Our scores in New York City, every district, even the poor districts, started to fly. Attendance improved. Suspensions were down because we improved the instruction and improved the activity, so kids wanted to come to school. It really was amazing, I thought, and then it ended too soon. It really ended. So my suggestion is the next step is a structure for not just consequences, although, if someone has terrible scores everywhere they go as a superintendent, well, also not only why, but should they be allowed to keep applying? I don't know. What are the consequences here? What are the strategies we need to build? Communication strategies over the data. What are we doing? Have have your scores improved as a result of it? It worked. I mean, I think he had the highest growth in math, or even the highest math scores, I think it was math, in the whole ever. He had a push on math, workshops on math, communication on math, and then he'd go to another subject. So now we got to get to the next step. What next? I think that's what I'm thinking all during this presentation. How do we remedy this immediately with communication and strategies, pedagogic strategies, and then consequences? What are the sanctions? Are we just going to say, consequences? So just mulling something like that, Commissioner, I would think well, also the Chancellor's District. I'm going to bring that up again, if I may. I'm sorry, I'm going over. Taking a district that's, I could name some that really need it. Do the instructional plan. It's not going to be you choose it. It's going to be you do it. And a lot of supervision. And that was the data was very successful on that when we did it. So maybe starting with one district somewhere is a thought you might consider, Chancellor and Commissioner?
Thank you. We have Vice Chancellor, Regent Chin, and Regent Tillis will close. Vice Chancellor?
Thank you, Madam Chancellor. I know that we are way behind on
Right.
scheduling, so I'll try to be very brief, and I won't ask some of my questions that I would have asked otherwise. But this is an important discussion, and I think we need to continue to keep it on the agenda as we go forward. We have to be careful in not being misguided by some of the conversation, and sometimes you have to look at what's not in a presentation as much as what's in a presentation, and that means no disrespect to the presenters, of course, because we are working on limited time and so forth. But Regent Johnson, you mentioned that it's an important point to ask the question, how many students have been disserved over the past years? And that's the real concern. And if we're not careful, we might begin to think of that as a 10-year exercise. But do we really think as we sit here, if we were to go back to year 11 and 12, we would have seen a different picture? We're talking about what we have only based on labels and measurements over the past 10-plus years. But even there, I think, Chris, you mentioned that we've been looking at these types of structures and measurements back to 2005. So if we do the math, 2005 to now gives us more than 10 years. So my concern is that this is a much bigger problem than just a 10-year problem. And I think it's going to take a lot more effort to address it than perhaps we're talking about here today. Chris, you mentioned one thing, and I'm paraphrasing. You said that we can't address special ed issues within special ed alone.
That's true.
That's what we've been talking about. We have to look bigger than this and broader than this. And Regent Norwood gave us some clear examples of how we have to look at this bigger. If all we're doing is talking about putting together a nice, neat plan to send out to districts and schools, we're going to get nothing. We're not going to get any changes. Many of the people who have been driving those systems are still in place. So do we really expect to get something different with the same people and the same, essentially, plan of action that we're just going to send back to them with different wording and phraseology? We're not. So I would certainly encourage SED staff to look for ways that we can engage those beyond what we call special ed programs within schools and districts, and look school-wide and district-wide, and also look statewide, and look outside of the educational structures altogether, and look at some of the different departments to bring about real change. And then lastly, we really haven't talked about dollars. We're talking about going about making big change from what we have, but we really haven't talked about the dollars. We looked at, there's a page in the presentation that talks about monitoring and supports. And do we have the financial resources and means, as well as the human resource, to go about making those types of changes? And I only tee that up as a question for future discussion, because we can have the greatest plan in the world, but if we don't have the money and the resources to drive it, we're getting somewhere.
Great points, Vice Chancellor. I think you're a keeper.
Voice of reason.
Regent Chin?
Okay, I had that conversation with the commissioner about a week ago regarding special ed issues, and I said to her that this issue is not only about 10 years, it's decades. You know, many of the issues, even when I was teaching, and that's a long time ago, still exist at this time. So what haven't we done? And really, that is really the question here. So when we look at non-compliance of districts, I would love to really hear about what is the non-compliance issues with schools and districts. Is it something within their control? Again, and I would hate to think that there's a lack of willingness of the schools, you know, principals and teachers not to help the students that are the most at risk. So when I look at the problematic areas like, you know, the longstanding noncompliance, evaluations, and due process adherence, it speaks to exactly what the Vice Chancellor said is about resources, both monetary and human resources. So there is a teacher shortage, you know, when you're coming to special ed teachers. So the question, that has implications then for a systemic solution and strategy. How do we now provide an incentive to recruit more certified special ed teachers? And then when you look at graduation rate, dropout rate, and a state assessment, that speaks to teaching and learning, and it's about curriculum, and it's about teacher preparation and training. And so now you're looking at higher education. So very much like Regent Norwood mentioned, this is much bigger than us. So and all of this to say is that we can't always the finger point that it's always the schools in the district, but that this is a much bigger issue that needs to be addressed by all. And so when we move ahead, I like to see this as a shared responsibility and accountability with the state ed department alongside with the schools and districts to make things happen. Because without that, exactly what everyone says, it's not going to improve down the road. Okay?
Thank you. Regent Tillis?
Yeah, two suggestions. Neither one costs a lot of money. I came into this issue, I think my first or second year as a regent, 120 years ago, that the feds were demanding that the regents rubber stamp the proposal that we've talked about year after year after year, that special ed students have to take the test at their age level, not the grade level they're on. I complained at the time to Commissioner Mills and said, what am I supposed to tell my daughter, who was then in 5th grade, that we're going to give her a test that we all know she's going to fail. Yeah. And he said, well, you want to tell her that you're going to break the law instead. I said, no, I don't have a problem with that.
You're right.
But, and we predicted that it was going to be a demoralizing and very, very poor thing to do. And indeed, that has all come true. I had the knowledge and resources to get some intervention for my daughter, but 99% of the people out there don't. And those kids who take the test year after year after year, failing a test, and everyone knows they're going to fail the test, don't really have a chance to make that up. And there is a self-esteem issue that is really hard to overcome. I would suggest, and we have asked for a waiver every single year. We thought we had it when John King went to Washington and had the ability to adjust it, but that did not happen. I think one of the reasons is that we have not come up with an alternative to make sure that all kids are covered and that no child is left behind. And I think that, to say that we just don't think that's a good idea is one thing, but I would convene a group of people and said, okay, there are alternatives to identifying districts that are not serving special ed kids or ELL kids or whatever else that don't require kids to take a test that everyone knows is going to fail. We have not presented that, and I think that would be something that I would hope that we could look at with stakeholders and others so that when our next waiver request goes in, we can at least offer an alternative. That's the first. The second one, it needs data. I think we need more data, not much more. But this board did something very significant, I think, a couple of years ago, after many, many discussions with special ed parents whose kids were passing all their tests in school and were passing courses and were even honor students who couldn't pass one Regents test. So we created a system where a principal and superintendent can waive that. And we are, just last year, I think, began to get figures of how many across the state there is. I think it's important to follow up and see how those students did in their first year of college or in their employment or whatever else. To see where are they, what are they doing? And there's not, a super amount of them, so I think that can be done. I think it's important for us to know the effect that we had, and indeed, maybe there's more that we need to do in the area of making sure that kids have the ability to move on with their lives without, and not deprive them of a diploma for issues that could be avoided. So if there is a way to identify those kids, I'm sure there is, from the districts, because we got the numbers, now we need to find out what happens to those kids afterwards.
I think that one of the issues is our conversation around the commitment to revisit the diploma and what it represents and what is it that what's our message in terms of the diploma itself, because a lot of times we think about, the holy grail of the Regents and the issue that the academics, whether it's being in a AP class, as if that's the ultimate, particularly in places where we don't even offer it. We hold the students; they're held accountable for something that they can't even access. So I really do think we have to rethink our diploma issue. I think we do have to rethink many of the situations around our waiver and our special needs. But I do think that there are three intersections that as we advance this work, that we think about. And one is the classification in terms of the IEP. If we don't think that that's in law, so if we don't think that has value, then why are we going through? I mean, I know it's in law. So if we're classifying children and we're creating a legal document called an IEP, then the feds, we all should honor what is in that comprehensive IEP. And then we get to the high stakes testing. And so we should have an intersection between the IEP, the high stakes testing, and the third, which you just talked about, is other types of diagnostic tests that really get at performance. Because there's, we all know there's not only one way to assess student performance, right? There are multiple ways of doing that. So if we're really committed to multiple, we talk about multiple all the time, and yet it seems that we put all our eggs, to a great extent, on the performance that I saw up there was the high stakes. It seems that the 30 districts are identified by the high stakes. So we really need to sort through our conversation and say, if it's the high stakes test that we really put everything into, then let's be honest and say that's what it is. If it is not, then let's our actions speak to the fact that we're looking at the IEP and where the student is. We're looking at the instructional atmosphere and opportunities that we create to advance that, and then let's see how we measure that in multiple ways. And then I also think that we have to honor the fact that if we have students with abilities, let's focus on those abilities in different ways to not only support those abilities, advance those abilities, but measure those abilities, because right now I have to tell you that a high-stakes test is only one way, and it's unfortunate that for many kids, we keep saying year after year, you're a failure, you're a failure, you're a failure. And we do the same thing with classes, we do the same thing with districts, and as a state, we then submit to the feds the same exact process. So we have to stop the process and say, how do we do a better job creating those intersections? And so on that note, we're going to continue this conversation because this is critical next month. So don't move because we're making some changes because how long it took us to get through this one. We are going to break for lunch so the audience can have lunch. And then we're going to resume our work upstairs on the 5th floor.
I do want to say that this.
At 1 o'clock.
As we've said and we heard from you, this needs to be coming back to you. When we're able to bring forward the plan as we move forward, we'll have a long discussion then, and then on a regular basis, you will receive information. You will also receive, again, the breakout that Regent Collins asked for by JD, and we'll put out the information related to any of the other slides that we took note that you wanted. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.